She was a bride on the run. He was the last person she expected to save her. Isabella Montgomery was trapped in a life she didn't choose, until she bolted from her wedding and landed on the back of a rebellious mechanic's motorcycle. But escaping wasn't the hard part. Now, she must face love, betrayal, and a dangerous game of power between two cousins, one she was meant to marry and one she can't resist. Will she risk everything for freedom? Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable stories. Liam Carter stood tall at the front of the grand ballroom, his sharp gray eyes scanning the sea of elegantly dressed guests. The massive crystal chandelier above cast a golden glow, illuminating the polished marble floors and floral arrangements that filled the space with the scent of fresh rose. The event was the talk of the city. A union of two powerful families, a strategic marriage designed to strengthen business empires. Yet, for Liam, this was nothing more than a transaction. His father, William Carter, had orchestrated every detail, ensuring that the Carter and Montgomery fortunes would be forever intertwined, and at the center of it all was Isabella Montgomery, the bride he barely knew, but was expected to call his wife by the end of the night. "Son," William's voice was firm but low, as if sensing Liam's hesitation. "Remember, this isn't just about you. It's about the future of our family." Liam let out a quiet sigh, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "I know, Dad. I always do what's expected." His father gave him a satisfied nod before stepping back into the crowd. Across the room, Isabella stood rigidly in her pristine white gown, the delicate lace sleeves hugging her slender arms. She was stunning. There was no denying that. But as she gazed into the mirror just moments before walking down the aisle, she felt nothing. No excitement, no nerves, no joy. What was wrong with her? Shouldn't a bride feel something? Her mother's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. "Isabella, fix your veil. You must look perfect for the ceremony." She clenched her fists beneath the folds of her dress. Perfect. That's all they ever wanted her to be. The perfect daughter, the perfect daughter, the perfect trophy for a business deal she never agreed to. The heavy double doors of the ballroom creaked open, and the guests turned their attention to the bride as she stepped forward. A slow melody played as she moved down the aisle, her heartbeat drowning out the whispers of admiration. Liam stood at the altar, watching her approach. Her steps were measured, deliberate, but there was something in her expression, something distant, unreadable. When she finally stood before him, her eyes briefly met his, and in that fleeting moment he saw it. Fear. Fear. The officiant cleared his throat and began the ceremony, his words blending into background noise. Liam barely listened, too focused on the way Isabella's grip tightened around the bouquet. Then came the question that sealed everything. Do you, Isabella Montgomery, take Liam Carter as your lawfully wedded husband, to love and to cherish, for better or for worse, as long as you both shall live? Silence. A tense, suffocating silence. The officiant blinked, waiting. Liam furrowed his brows. The guests exchanged puzzled glances. "Miss Montgomery?" the officiant prompted again. Isabella's chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath quick and uneven. The walls felt like they were closing in, the weight of expectation crushing her. Her fingers twitched. And then, before anyone could process what was happening, she ripped the veil from her head, tossed the bouquet aside, and turned on her heel. Gasps erupted as the crowd watched in shock. "Isabella!" her mother shrieked, but she didn't stop. "Stop her!" William barked, his face red with fury. Liam, frozen for a split second, finally reacted. "Catch her! Now!" he ordered his men. But Isabella was already running, lifting the hem of her gown as she sprinted through the grand hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get out. She had to breathe. As she burst through the heavy entrance doors, the night air hit her like a slap. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she couldn't slow down. Then, as if fate had intervened, a motorcycle screeched to a stop right in front of her. Ethan Carter pulled off his helmet, his tousled brown hair falling over his forehead as he eyed her with mild amusement. "You look like a runaway bride," he mused. "Just drive," Isabella gasped, her grip tightening on his arm. Ethan raised a brow. "You serious?" "Yes," she snapped. "They're coming." Ethan barely had time to process before he felt her climbing onto the back of his bike. The heavy stomp of approaching footsteps echoed behind them. "Shit," Ethan muttered, revving the engine. Liam and his men burst onto the driveway just as the motorcycle shot forward. "Find her," Liam roared, fists clenched. "I don't care how long it takes. Bring her back." But by the time his men scattered into action, Isabella was already gone, disappearing into the night with the last person anyone expected. The city lights blurred into streaks as Ethan's motorcycle sped down the highway, the roar of the engine drowning out the frantic thoughts racing through Isabella's mind. She clung tightly to him, her fingers digging into his leather jacket as the wind whipped through her hair. She didn't dare look back. She didn't need to. She could still hear the chaos she'd left behind in her pounding heartbeat. Ethan smirked under his helmet. "So, what exactly is your plan, Princess?" he called over the wind. "I don't know. Just keep going," she shouted. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You just ruined a multi-million-dollar wedding, ran away in a designer dress, and jumped on a stranger's bike, but you have no plan. That's bold." "I know who you are," Isabella snapped, tightening her hold on him as he swerved around a car. "Ethan Carter, Liam's cousin." Ethan's amusement flickered into something more serious. "So, you do know who I am," he mused. "And you still got on my bike. Interesting. Like I had a choice," she muttered. The city skyline disappeared behind them as they crossed a bridge, heading toward the industrial outskirts of town. Soon, the buildings turned into warehouses, and the streets became less polished, more rugged. Isabella didn't care where they were going. She only knew she couldn't go back. Finally, Ethan pulled into a dusty lot, surrounded by stacked piles of metal, half-repaired cars, and scattered tools. The air smelled like oil and rust. Isabella barely had time to register her surroundings before Ethan killed the engine and swung off the bike. He turned to her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "All right, Princess, you're here. Now what?" he asked. Isabella hesitated. For the first time since bolting from the church, she was forced to confront reality. She had nowhere to go. If she tried to run to a hotel, her family would find her in hours. If she called someone for help, they'd convince her to go back. She bit her lip, standing awkwardly next to the bike. I just need to stay somewhere for the night." Ethan scoffed. "You want to crash at my scrapyard. You do know I don't exactly run a 5-star hotel, right?" "I don't care," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I just need a place to think." He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether she was serious or just another spoiled girl making a reckless decision. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. He led her through a side entrance into what looked like a makeshift living space. Small, cluttered, but surprisingly cozy. There was an old couch, a workbench covered in tools, and a tiny kitchen with dishes stacked in the sink. "This is it," he said, tossing his helmet onto a table. "Not exactly a mansion, but it'll do." Isabella stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath her heels. She glanced around, taking in the mismatched furniture and the scent of motor oil lingering in the air. It was a far cry from the pristine elegance of her parents' estate, but oddly enough, she didn't hate it. Ethan flopped onto the couch, watching her with a lazy smirk. So, do I get an explanation now? Or are we just going to pretend you didn't just hijack my bike and make me an accomplice in your runaway bride act? Isabella hesitated before finally sinking onto a chair across from him. My parents arranged the marriage, she admitted. I barely know Liam. I didn't want to marry him, but didn't want to marry him. But they wouldn't listen. It was never about love. It was about power, about business. Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, sounds like my uncle. She let out a bitter laugh. The worst part. I was actually going to go through with it. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd get used to it. But then, standing at that altar, I realized I couldn't. I couldn't. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Well, that takes guts. I'll give you that. But you do realize Liam isn't the type to just let this go, right? He'll come looking for you. Isabella swallowed hard. She knew that. The Carter family didn't tolerate humiliation. I just need time to figure things out, she said. Just a few days. Ethan exhaled heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. She shot him a glare.
Excuse me?
He grinned. Relax, princess. You can stay. But if you're going to be here, you'd better be useful. No freeloaders. She frowned. What does that mean? He pointed to the small kitchen. It means if you're staying in my place, you're cooking breakfast tomorrow. Isabella scoffed. I don't cook. Ethan laughed. Figures. She crossed her arms. I can learn. He smirked. Now that I gotta see. A silence settled between them, heavier this time. Isabella shifted uncomfortably. Thank you, she muttered, barely audible. Ethan raised a brow. For what? For letting me stay, she said, looking away. For not asking too many questions. His smirk softened into something more genuine. Don't thank me yet. You might regret this by morning. She rolled her eyes but said nothing. For the first time, all night, she allowed herself to exhale. She wasn't safe, not really, but for now, she was free. And that was enough. Liam sat in his dimly lit office, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his jaw clenched as he replayed the night's events in his mind. Isabella had humiliated him in front of their families, in front of the entire business world. His father's words still echoed in his head. Find her. Bring her back. His men were already scouring the city for her, but so far, they had nothing. Frustration simmered beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't a man who lost, and Isabella running from him. That wasn't just a rejection. It was a challenge. A sharp knock at the door made him look up. One of his men stepped inside, hesitant. Sir, we found her. Liam straightened in his chair, his grip tightening around the glass. Where? The man cleared his throat. It's complicated. We thought we found her. Liam narrowed his eyes.
What the hell does that mean?
The man shifted uncomfortably. We tracked a woman matching Isabella's description to an outdoor market near the docks. She was selling vegetables, looked different, worn-out clothes, apron, worn-out clothes, apron, hair down. We figured she was in disguise, hiding. Liam frowned. That didn't sound like Isabella at all. Go on. The man coughed. We, brought her in. But now we're not so sure. She's acting strange. Liam didn't have time for cryptic answers. He stood abruptly, adjusting his suit jacket. "Where is she?" "In the guest house, sir. She's been yelling at us for the past hour." Liam exhaled sharply, striding past his men, his patience thin. The moment he stepped into the guest house, his sharp eyes landed on the woman seated on the couch. She was the spitting image of Isabella. But something was off. She wasn't sitting stiffly, like Isabella would have. Instead, she was sprawled across the cushions, arms crossed, her foot tapping against the floor impatiently. Her expression wasn't filled with the quiet, refined defiance he had come to expect from Isabella. It was annoyed, almost amused. Liam narrowed his gaze. "Isabella." She snorted.
Oh, now I'm Isabella.
"Funny, because I've been telling these idiots for hours that I'm not." Liam's brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" The woman sat up straighter, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Listen, Mr. Rich Guy. I don't know what weird kidnapping fetish you have, but I am not Isabella Montgomery. My name is Ava Reed. Ava." She pronounced it slowly, as if speaking to a particularly slow child. Liam's eyes darkened. "You expect me to believe that?" She rolled her eyes. "I don't care what you believe. I was selling vegetables when your goons grabbed me like I was some fugitive. And let me tell you, if this is how you normally handle women, it's no wonder your fiancé ran for the hills." Liam clenched his jaw, stepping closer, towering over her. Most people would shrink under his gaze, but this woman, she simply arched a brow and smirked.
Say I believe you, Liam said coolly. Why do you look exactly like Isabella?
Ava shrugged. "Beats me. Maybe the universe thought it'd be funny." Liam studied her, his instincts sharp. She had Isabella's face. There was no denying that. But her posture, her speech, her attitude, all wrong. Isabella was composed, controlled. This woman was all fire and sarcasm. One of his men hesitated.
Sir, should we?
Liam held up a hand, silencing him. Ava crossed her arms. "Oh!" Liam didn't respond. Instead, he plucked a strand of hair from her shoulder and placed it in a small plastic bag. Ava gaped at him. "Did you just steal my hair? What is wrong with you?" Liam smirked. "If you're telling the truth, you have nothing to worry about." She threw her hands up. "Unbelievable. First, I get kidnapped. Now, I'm part of some billionaire's weird science experiment. This day just keeps getting better." Liam turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "Until I get those results back, you're staying here." Ava scoffed. "Oh, fantastic. Trapped in a mansion with a grumpy rich guy. Living the dream." Liam didn't bother responding. He shut the door behind him, his mind racing. If this woman wasn't Isabella, then where the hell was she? Isabella woke up to the scent of oil and metal, the faint sound of tools clanking in the distance. The thin mattress beneath her was stiff, nothing like the luxurious bedding she was used to, and for a moment, disoriented. She almost forgot where she was. Then the events of last night came crashing back. The wedding, the escape, Ethan's scrapyard. She groaned, rubbing her face before sitting up. Sunlight streamed through the small window, illuminating the cluttered but surprisingly clean space. The room wasn't much. Just a cot, a wooden dresser, and a chair covered with old jackets. But it was hers, at least for now. A loud bang outside startled her. She threw on the oversized hoodie Ethan had given her the night before, pushing open the door just in time to see him crouched next to a beat. Up car, grease smeared across his forearm. "Morning, Princess," Ethan called without looking up, his voice laced with amusement. "Don't call me that," she muttered, stepping out onto the dusty lot. Ethan finally glanced at her. smirking. You sure? You sure? You still look like a lost princess in the middle of the apocalypse. She scowled. Whatever. I need coffee. He nodded toward the small shed that served as his kitchen. There's instant coffee in there. Knock yourself out. Isabella wrinkled her nose.
Instant! That's a crime.
Ethan chuckled, standing up and wiping his hands on a rag. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Highness. I seem to be all out of imported espresso beans. Guess you'll have to rough it. She crossed her arms. Fine. Just point me in the direction of civilization, and I'll go get real coffee myself. Ethan leaned against the car, arms folded. Yeah, not happening. Her jaw tightened. Excuse me. You think Liam's guys aren't looking for you? He asked, tilting his head. You step outside my lot and someone's gonna recognize you. And trust me, they won't be as friendly as me. She hated that he was right. Taking a deep breath, she exhaled through her nose. So what am I supposed to do? Hide in here forever? Ethan shrugged. Nope. But you need to lay low for a bit. And while you're at it, you're gonna make yourself useful. She raised an eyebrow. Useful how? He tossed a wrench in her direction. She barely caught it, fumbling as it almost slipped from her fingers. You're gonna learn how to work, he said. Welcome to the scrapyard, princess. She gaped at him. You can't be serious. Ethan smirked. Dead serious. Half an hour later, Isabella stood in front of an old motorcycle, scowling as Ethan leaned lazily against the workbench, watching her struggle with a bolt. This is ridiculous, she muttered, gripping the wrench tighter. Why am I even doing this? Because you're staying here, and I don't do freeloaders, Ethan replied, reaching over to tighten the bolt she'd been struggling with in one smooth motion. She huffed.
Yeah, but manual labor? Do I look like the type?
He smirked. Nope, which is exactly why I'm making you do it. She shot him a glare before turning back to the motorcycle. Her hands were already sore and she was sure she smelled like oil, but a stubborn part of her refused to quit. If he wanted her to work, fine. She'd prove she wasn't some helpless debutante. An hour later, she had grease on her cheek, dirt under her nails, and an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. Ethan stepped back, nodding in approval. Not bad, princess. She rolled her eyes, wiping sweat from her forehead. If you call me that one more time, I swear. Relax. He grinned, tossing her a bottle of water. You did good today? She took a sip, studying him for a moment. Why are you helping me? He hesitated before answering. She blinked at him, caught off guard by his honesty. You ran away from a life you didn't want, Ethan continued. That takes guts. But running's the easy part. Figuring out what comes next. That's the hard part. Isabella looked down at her hands, gripping the water bottle tightly. He was right. She had no plan, no idea what she was supposed to do now. But for the first time, she wasn't completely alone. She glanced up at Ethan, meeting his gaze. I guess. I should start figuring it out. He smirked. That's the spirit. And for the first time since she ran, Isabella felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Liam sat in his office, his fingers drumming rhythmically against the polished mahogany desk. The DNA test results would arrive any moment now, and despite himself, he felt a strange sense of anticipation. He had been watching Ava closely since she arrived at the estate, and though she had Isabella's face, everything about her was different. She was reckless, outspoken, and had none of Isabella's refined mannerisms. Instead of walking with the practiced grace of a socialite, she slouched in the chairs, propped her feet up on the coffee table, and made sarcastic comments that drove him insane. Liam had spent years perfecting his ability to read people. Ava wasn't lying. She truly believed she wasn't Isabella. But logic dictated otherwise. It was impossible for two people to look that identical and not be connected in some way. The sharp buzz of his phone snapped him out of his thoughts. He grabbed it and pressed it to his ear. "Tell me," he ordered. The voice on the other end cleared its throat. "Sir, the DNA test results came in. The woman in your estate is not Isabella Montgomery." Liam stilled. What? There's no genetic match. She's not her twin, not her relative. Just a stranger who happens to look exactly like her. Liam exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. He had expected some connection, even a distant one. But this, it made no sense. He ended the call and stood abruptly, heading straight for the guest house. Ava was lounging on the couch, flipping through a magazine she had stolen from one of the servants. When she noticed Liam approaching, she raised an eyebrow. "Oh, great. What now? Gonna accuse me of identity theft again?" she asked dryly, tossing the magazine onto the coffee table. Liam didn't reply immediately. Instead, he studied her, his expression unreadable. "You're not Isabella." She blinked. "Yeah, I've been saying that." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Nope. A long-lost sister? Not that I know of." Liam sat down across from her, resting his elbows on his knees. "Then why the hell do you look exactly like her?" Ava shrugged. "Some people say everyone has a doppelganger." Liam wasn't convinced. It's too much of a coincidence. Ava smirked. "Well, maybe fate just wanted to mess with you." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Unbelievable." She stretched her arms over her head, sighing. "Sue." No. She groaned. "Seriously, why? You just proved I'm not the runaway bride." Liam's jaw tightened. "Because I don't like unfinished business." Ava rolled her eyes. "Wow, what an honor." Liam ignored her sarcasm. "Until I figure out what to do next, you're staying here." Ava crossed her arms. "And if I refuse?" He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "You won't." She scoffed, but deep down, she knew he was right. For all her bravado, she had nowhere to go. She wasn't rich, she had no connections that could protect her. And if she walked out that door, she had no doubt Liam's men would drag her right back. She let out an exaggerated sigh. "Fine, but I'm charging rent." Liam smirked despite himself. "Good luck collecting." Ava rolled her eyes but said nothing more. Liam stood, heading for the door, but paused before exiting. "You're not Isabella, but you're still involved in this now. So don't do anything reckless." Ava gave him a mock salute. "Yes, sir." Liam shook his head, closing the door behind him. As he walked back toward the main house, his mind was already shifting to the bigger problem. If Ava was here, then where the hell was Isabella? The sun was just beginning to set when Isabella wiped the sweat from her forehead, staring at the old motorcycle she had spent hours attempting to fix. Ethan leaned against the doorway of the garage, arms crossed, amusement dancing in his eyes as he watched her struggle. "Not bad, princess," he mused, taking a slow sip from a water bottle. "You only almost broke it twice today." She shot him a glare, setting the wrench down with more force than necessary. "For the last time, stop calling me that." Ethan smirked. "What?" "It suits you." A runaway bride from a billionaire family slumming it with the commoners. Sounds like a modern-day fairy tale. She rolled her eyes, reaching for the rag beside her and wiping the grease off her hands. Yeah, except I traded a castle for a scrapyard. You're welcome, by the way, Ethan added, pushing off the wall and strolling over to her. For letting you crash here, feeding you, keeping you off Liam's radar. Isabella sighed. I know. I appreciate it, okay, even if you are insufferable. Ethan chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. Just as Isabella was about to retort, a sharp knock on the metal side of the garage made them both turn. One of Ethan's crew members, Danny, stood at the entrance, looking uneasy. Oh, boss, we might have a problem. Ethan straightened. What kind of problem? Danny hesitated before jerking his thumb toward the front lot. Some guys in suits. Look like they belonged to the other Carter. Isabella's stomach dropped. Liam's men. Ethan's playful demeanor vanished in an instant. His jaw clenched as he turned to Isabella. Stay here, he ordered. No way, she whispered harshly. They're looking for me. Ethan's gaze darkened. Then I'll handle it. Before she could argue, he was already moving toward the entrance, rolling his shoulders like he was preparing for a fight. Isabella followed cautiously, peeking from behind the doorway as Ethan strode into the lot where two men in dark suits stood beside a black SUV. The taller of the two, a man with a clean-shaven face and an air of authority, took a slow step forward. Ethan Carter, right? Ethan didn't reply immediately. Instead, he pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lighting it with an infuriating level of calm. Depends. Who's asking? The man smirked. Your cousin sent us. Ethan exhaled a stream of smoke, his expression unreadable. Liam, the man nodded. We're looking for someone. You wouldn't happen to have seen Isabella Montgomery, would you? Isabella's breath hitched. Ethan took another slow drag of his cigarette before flicking it onto the ground and crushing it under his boot. Isabella Montgomery, he repeated, his tone light, almost mocking. Can't say I have. Sounds like a real high-maintenance type. The shorter man, younger and clearly less patient, stepped forward. Cut the act. We know she was seen around here. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's so... The taller man smirked again. Word is, she jumped on your bike the night of the wedding. Ethan's smirk didn't falter. The shorter man's patience snapped. Enough of this bullshit. His hand moved toward his jacket, toward a gun. Before Isabella could react, Ethan was already moving. In a single, fluid motion, he closed the distance, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until the guy let out a sharp grunt of pain. The gun clattered to the pavement. The taller man didn't even flinch. If anything, he looked impressed. Relax, Carter, he said, holding up his hands. No need to get violent. We're just here to talk. Ethan didn't release his grip immediately. He stared the younger man down for a long, tense moment before finally letting go, shoving him back with just enough force to make a point. You did talk, Ethan said flatly. Now get the hell off my lot. The taller man chuckled. We'll be back. Ethan's smirk returned, looking forward to it. The two men got into the SUV, tires screeching as they pulled away. Isabella let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ethan turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Pack a bag, princess? He said, his voice quieter now, more serious. She frowned. Why? His eyes met hers, a rare flicker of concern in them. Because it's only a matter of time before they come back. Isabella sat on the edge of Ethan's worn-out couch, gripping the straps of the old backpack he had given her. Her mind was racing. Liam's men had found them. Not completely, not yet. But they were closing in. She could see it in Ethan's face. He was usually relaxed, even in tense situations, but now, he was pacing. That wasn't a good sign. "I told you they wouldn't stop looking," she muttered, watching him as he ran a hand through his already messy hair. Ethan shot her a look. "Yeah, no kidding, princess. What I didn't expect was for them to start waving guns around." She swallowed hard. "So, what do we do?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "We leave." Her fingers tightened around the straps of her bag. "Where?" He stopped pacing, looking at her like she had just asked the dumbest question in the world. "Anywhere that isn't here." She hesitated. The scrapyard had become something of a strange sanctuary. It was dirty, chaotic, nothing like the pristine, sterile world she had come from. But it had also been the first place she had felt like she could breathe. Now she was being uprooted again. Ethan noticed her hesitation and frowned. "Unless you want to stick around and roll the dice on Liam's guys coming back with more than just questions." She scowled. "Obviously not." "Then get moving." He grabbed a set of keys from the counter and headed for the door. Isabella followed, her heart pounding as she stepped into the cool night air. The scrapyard was eerily quiet, the usual distant sounds of the city muffled under the weight of what was coming. Ethan led her toward a sleek, black motorcycle parked near the gate. It wasn't the old, patched-up one he usually rode. It was something newer, faster. "This isn't yours," she noted, eyeing the unfamiliar bike. Ethan smirked as he swung a leg over it. "Borrowed." Isabella didn't ask for details. She climbed on behind him, gripping his waist tightly. "Hold on," he warned. And then they were off. The motorcycle roared to life, tearing down the back streets as Ethan weaved through the city with practiced ease. Isabella kept her head down, pressing herself against his back to make them less noticeable. Minutes passed, then an hour. Only when they were far from the city, miles away from anything familiar, did Ethan finally slow down, pulling off onto a dirt road leading toward a dark wooded area. The bike rolled to a stop near an abandoned-looking cabin, half hidden by overgrown trees. Isabella shivered as she climbed off, rubbing her arms. "This is your idea of a safe house?" she asked, eyeing the dilapidated structure. Ethan shrugged. "No one's gonna look for you in a place like this." He wasn't wrong. The cabin looked like something out of a horror movie. Still, she followed him inside. The interior wasn't much better. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled like wood and something slightly damp. Ethan dropped his bag on an old table and glanced at her. "It's not exactly 5-star, but it'll do for now." She exhaled, setting her own bag down. "And what happens after now?" Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching her carefully. "That depends on you." She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" He crossed his arms. "You ran from Liam. You knew what that meant. But running doesn't last forever. Eventually, you have to decide what comes next." Isabella's stomach twisted. She hated that he was right. She ran because she had to. But she hadn't thought beyond that. Now, for the first time, she had to figure out what she actually wanted. She looked at Ethan, really looked at him. He had risked everything to help her. No hesitation, no second guessing. Maybe that was the answer. She took a step closer. "And what if I want to stay?" Ethan's smirk faded slightly. His gaze softened, just a fraction. "Then you stay," he said simply. And for the first time since she had left her old life behind, Isabella didn't feel like she was running anymore. Liam had always been a man who controlled every aspect of his life. He made calculated decisions, never allowing emotions to dictate his actions. But standing in the dimly lit hallway outside Ava's room, he found himself hesitating for the first time in a long while. The DNA test had confirmed what she had been saying all along. She wasn't Isabella. She had no connection to the Montgomery family, no ties to the life that had just exploded in his face when Isabella ran. And yet, she was still here. A stranger with a familiar face, sitting in the middle of his carefully structured world like an unsolved puzzle. He knocked. Ava's voice came from inside, sharp as ever. "If you're here to steal more of my DNA, I might start charging you." Liam pushed the door open without waiting for an invitation. She was sprawled on the couch, legs tucked under her, flipping through a magazine she had no real interest in. "Charming," he muttered, shutting the door behind him. Ava smirked, tossing the magazine aside. "You always look this grumpy?" Liam ignored the question, stepping closer. "I want answers." Ava raised an eyebrow.
Ah! I thought you got your answers. Or did your fancy lab screw up the test?
He exhaled slowly, reining in his frustration. "Not those answers. I want to know who you are." Ava tilted her head, clearly enjoying his irritation. Ava Reed, street vendor. Part-time mechanic. Professional kidnapping victim, apparently. Liam's jaw ticked. "That attitude of yours is going to get you in trouble." She grinned. He wasn't sure what it was. Her fearlessness, her absolute refusal to be intimidated by him, or the way she wasn't Isabella, but had the same damn face. But she was under his skin now. And for a man like Liam, that was unacceptable. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "You're not her." Her smile faltered just a little. "No," she said. Quieter this time. "I'm not." Silence stretched between them, thick with something neither of them wanted to name. Then, as if snapping herself out of whatever moment had just passed, Ava sat up and clapped her hands together. "Well, this has been fun, but if you're not here to let me go, then you should probably get out. I'd hate to have to start charging rent." Liam studied her for another moment before finally stepping back. "You're staying," he said simply. Ava groaned. "Of course I am." Without another word, he turned and left, shutting the door behind him with just a little more force than necessary. Ethan had been quiet all evening, which was weird. Isabella had grown used to his constant teasing, his sarcastic remarks, the way he poked at her like it was some kind of sport. But ever since they had arrived at the abandoned cabin, he had barely said a word. She watched him now from across the small wooden table, the dim lantern casting shadows across his face as he worked on an old radio, fiddling with the wires like they held the answers to whatever was going on in his head. She tapped her fingers against the table.
"So, are we going to talk about it?"
Ethan didn't look up. "Talk about what?" "About the fact that you're acting weird." He smirked slightly. Define weird. She rolled her eyes. Quiet. Broody. Like a guy who just realized he made a huge mistake bringing me here. Ethan finally set the screwdriver down, meeting her gaze. "I don't think bringing you here was a mistake." She blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. I don't know how long we can keep this up. Liam's not an idiot. He's going to figure out where you are eventually." Isabella swallowed, the weight of reality settling onto her shoulders. She had been so focused on escaping that she hadn't thought much about what would happen next. Ethan leaned forward slightly. I meant what I said earlier. You can stay. But you need to decide if that's really what you want. She hesitated. And if I don't? Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice was even when he answered. Then I take you somewhere safe, somewhere far enough that Liam and your family won't find you. And after that, you're on your own. A lump formed in her throat. He was giving her a choice. For the first time in her life, she got to decide. She looked at him, really looked at him, the grease-stained hands, the tired eyes that still held that familiar spark, the way he had put himself in danger for her without hesitation. Maybe it wasn't really a choice at all. I stay, she said, her voice steady. Ethan's lips twitched, just barely. Good. For the first time since she ran, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Liam sat in his private study, the fire casting flickering shadows across the walls. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the desk beside him, the ice slowly melting. His mind, however, was focused on something far more troubling than the drink in front of him. Ava Reed. She wasn't Isabella. That much was clear now. But that didn't change the fact that she was tangled in this mess. His mess. And more than that, it didn't change the way she got under his skin. He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his jaw as he glanced at the security feed on his laptop. The camera outside the guest house showed Ava sitting on the porch, her legs dangling off the edge, her face turned up toward the stars. She was too relaxed, too comfortable, as if she belonged here. Liam hated how that thought sat with him. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. One of his men entered, his face tense. Sir, we've located Isabella. Liam's grip on the edge of the desk tightened. Where? The man hesitated. She's with Ethan Carter. Liam's expression darkened. His cousin. Of course. The moment Isabella had bolted from the altar, she had found her way straight to Ethan. Liam should have expected it. His cousin had always been a wild card, the black sheep of the Carter family, the one who thrived in chaos. And now he had her. Liam stood, straightening his jacket. Prepare the jet. I want to be there by morning. The man nodded and left. Liam exhaled slowly, his mind sharpening into a singular focus. It was time to bring Isabella home. Ethan had just finished checking the perimeter of the cabin when he heard the sound of a car engine in the distance. His instincts flared immediately. This place was isolated. No one should be out here. He turned back toward the cabin, his steps quickening. Isabella was inside, curled up on the old couch, with a book she had pulled from one of the dusty shelves. She looked up as soon as he entered. What's wrong? Ethan grabbed a duffel bag from the corner, already stuffing it with supplies.
We need to go. Now.
She sat up straighter. Why? What happened? I don't know yet, but I have a bad feeling. Before she could respond, headlights cut through the trees outside, illuminating the cabin in a harsh glow. Ethan's jaw tightened. Too late. A knock echoed against the wooden door, slow and deliberate. Isabella froze. It's him, isn't it? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The knock came again, firmer this time. Ethan exhaled. Stay behind me. He moved to the door and pulled it open. Liam stood there, flanked by two of his men, his expression unreadable. Cousin, Ethan drawled, leaning against the doorframe like he wasn't at all concerned that one of the most powerful men in the city had just shown up at his hideout. Liam's gaze flickered past him, landing on Isabella. She met his stare, her spine straightening. Liam. His expression didn't change. It's time to come home. Isabella's heart pounded. Ethan let out a low chuckle. Yeah, see, that's not gonna happen. Liam's eyes snapped back to him. You're harboring a runaway bride. That doesn't end well for anyone involved. Ethan smirked. You make it sound so dramatic. Liam stepped forward, his voice quieter now, more dangerous. You don't know what you're getting yourself into, Ethan. Ethan's smirk didn't waver. And you don't know what you walked into. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The tension was razor sharp. Then, to everyone's surprise, Isabella stepped forward. I'm not going with you. Liam's expression finally flickered, a muscle in his jaw tightening. You don't have a choice. She lifted her chin.
Actually, I do. I always did. I just didn't realize it before.
Liam exhaled through his nose as if barely holding on to his patience. Isabella. No, she cut in. You don't get to decide for me. Not anymore. Ethan glanced at her, a small flicker of something like pride crossing his face. Liam studied her for a long moment, then finally stepped back. Fine, he said coolly. If you don't come with me now, don't expect another chance. Isabella swallowed, but she didn't back down. Liam's gaze lingered on her for one more second before he turned on his heel and walked back toward his car. Ethan waited until the headlights disappeared into the trees before exhaling. Well, he muttered, looking at Isabella. Guess that's that. She let out a shaky breath. Yeah. Ethan smirked. You did good, princess. She rolled her eyes, but there was a ghost of a smile there. For the first time, she felt free. Isabella barely had time to process what had just happened before Ethan was already moving, locking the door behind him and checking the windows. His movements were quick, efficient, like someone who had been in situations like this before. She exhaled, pressing a hand to her chest, willing her heart to slow down. So, that just happened. Ethan snorted, grabbing his jacket and tossing her one of his spare hoodies. She caught the hoodie but didn't put it on. Do you think he's really going to let it go? Ethan didn't answer right away. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. Liam's not the type to lose and walk away. Her stomach twisted.
So what now?
Ethan's gaze flicked to her. Now we prepare. She frowned. For what? For whatever comes next. Liam sat in the back of his car, his fingers drumming against his knee as the city skyline blurred past. His driver knew better than to interrupt his thoughts. The men seated across from him were equally silent, waiting for orders. Finally, Liam spoke. Tell my father the deal with the Montgomerys is over. One of the men hesitated.
Sir, are you sure this was...
I don't repeat myself, Liam cut in, his tone sharp. The man swallowed and nodded. Liam turned to the window, his jaw clenching. Isabella had made her choice. But if she thought that was the end of it, she was wrong. She may have walked away from him, but she wasn't free yet. And Ethan? That traitor had no idea what kind of war he had just started. The next morning, Isabella sat on the cabin's porch, staring out into the woods as the sun slowly rose over the treetops. The world looked calm, untouched by the chaos of the night before. But she knew better. She could still see the way Liam had looked at her, the cold calculation, the warning hidden beneath the indifference. He wasn't done. Ethan stepped outside, stretching, his shirt wrinkled from sleep. She sighed, couldn't sleep. He dropped down onto the step beside her. Figured. A comfortable silence settled between them. Then Isabella spoke. Do you think I made a mistake? Ethan turned his head toward her. By telling Liam to go to hell. No, that was the smartest thing you've done. She exhaled, but the tightness in her chest didn't fade. I don't know what happens next. My family won't forgive me. Liam won't forgive me. And I have nothing now. Ethan was quiet for a moment before he nudged her shoulder. You have me. She glanced at him, surprised. He smirked. And this fine establishment. He gestured dramatically toward the run. Down cabin. 5-star accommodations, obviously. Despite everything, she laughed. Ethan grinned. See, that's better. She shook her head. You're impossible. He leaned back on his hands. Yeah, but you like me anyway. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. He wasn't wrong. And that scared her more than Liam ever could. Because Ethan wasn't just a hiding place. He was starting to feel like home. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and flowers as Isabella stood at the edge of the wedding venue, staring out at the endless horizon. The ceremony was set up on a private beachfront with rows of white chairs lined up neatly in front of a flower-adorned arch. The sound of waves crashing against the shore mixed with the soft hum of a string quartet. It was perfect. And somehow, she was still trying to process that this was her wedding. She exhaled slowly, smoothing her hands down the fabric of her gown. Just a few months ago, she had been standing at another altar, suffocating under the weight of expectations, feeling like a prisoner in a life she didn't want. Now, everything was different. She was different. A knock on the door made her turn. Ava stepped inside, dressed in an identical white gown, a smirk playing on her lips. Isabella let out a shaky laugh. You don't look ready either. Ava shrugged. I'm always ready for chaos. Isabella rolled her eyes, but a warmth settled in her chest. What were the odds that the woman who had been mistaken for her would end up being one of the most important people in her life? Ava walked over, adjusting the veil on Isabella's hair. You... nervous... Terrified, Isabella admitted. Ava grinned. Good. That means it's real. They stood there for a moment, mirror images of each other, until a voice called from outside. Let's go, ladies. Don't keep your grooms waiting. Ava winked.
Showtime!
Ethan stood at the altar, rolling his shoulders as he waited. He had never been the kind of guy who imagined getting married. Hell, if someone had told him a year ago that he'd be standing here, dressed in a suit, waiting for Isabella Montgomery to walk down the aisle toward him, he would have laughed in their face. Yet, here he was. And for once, he didn't feel like running. Liam stood beside him, his usual composed expression in place, but Ethan caught the way he kept adjusting his cuffs. Nervous, cousin, Ethan teased. Liam shot him a dry look.
Shouldn't I be asking you that?
Ethan smirked. Not at all. Isabella chose me. You were just the backup plan. Liam sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I can't believe I'm related to you. Ethan chuckled, but before he could respond, the music changed. Everyone turned as the brides appeared at the top of the aisle, veils covering their faces. For a brief moment, Ethan's heart stopped. Isabella looked stunning. Her gown flowed like water around her, the soft fabric catching the light. And even though he couldn't see her face clearly, he felt her smile. Liam, for once, seemed equally distracted as Ava walked beside Isabella, the two of them identical, yet entirely different. The guests murmured as the brides approached, the resemblance between them causing more than a few confused whispers. Ethan could barely hear any of it. He only saw her. When they finally reached the altar, the music faded and the officiant cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to celebrate. But Ethan barely heard a word of it. because the moment the officiant spoke, both Isabella and Ava turned to the wrong grooms. Ethan frowned slightly. "Princess?" Isabella turned her head just enough for him to see the mischievous glint in her eyes. "Oh, hell no," Ethan muttered. Liam's brows furrowed as he glanced at Ava. "You're not Isabella." Ava grinned. "Wow, you do pay attention." A laugh rippled through the crowd as the two brides finally switched places. Ethan shook his head. "You are trouble." Isabella beamed at him. "And yet, here you are." The officiant, clearly amused, chuckled before continuing. Minutes later, when the vows were said and the rings exchanged, Ethan didn't hesitate. The moment the words "you may kiss the bride" were spoken, he pulled Isabella into his arms, pressing his lips to hers with a certainty he had never felt before. Cheers erupted around them, but all he could focus on was her. She was his. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter had everything he had ever wanted. The California sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink as waves lapped gently at the shore. The wedding celebration had long since moved from the elegant beachfront venue to the more relaxed atmosphere of the resort's private villa. The sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and soft music filled the air as guests settled into a more comfortable rhythm. Isabella leaned against the wooden railing of the balcony, a glass of champagne in her hand, watching the ocean stretch endlessly before her. The past few months had been nothing short of chaotic, but now, standing here as Isabella Carter, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. She felt strong arms wrap around her waist, pulling her back into the warmth of Ethan's chest. "Regretting it already?" he teased, his lips brushing against her ear. She smiled, tilting her head slightly to look at him. "Not even a little." Ethan smirked. "Good, because I'd hate to have to chase you down again." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't stop the laughter that bubbled up. "You make it sound like I ran from you." His grip tightened around her waist. "Technically, you ran to me. Best decision you've ever made, by the way." She sighed, leaning back into him. "Yeah, I think it was." Ethan pressed a slow kiss to the side of her neck before murmuring, "Come on, princess. Time to rejoin the party." Hand in hand, they walked back into the lively reception area, where guests were still celebrating. At the center of it all, Ava was seated at a long table, engaged in a heated wrestling match with one of Ethan's scrapyard crew members. Liam stood nearby, arms crossed, shaking his head. "I cannot believe I married this woman." Ava grinned as she slammed the man's hand down onto the table. "That's Mrs. Carter to you, darling," she said smugly, making the crowd burst into laughter. Liam sighed, rubbing his temple, but the way he watched her, like he still couldn't believe she was real, gave him away. Isabella nudged Ethan. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Ethan chuckled. "Not in a million years." Across the room, Ryan, one of Liam's right-hand men, raised his glass and called out, "To the Carter cousins, who somehow managed to marry twin strangers." The crowd erupted into cheers. Ava smirked, raising her glass. Liam sighed again. "I still don't understand how this happened." Ethan grinned, pulling Isabella into his side. "Sometimes, cousin, life just knows better than we do." Liam glanced at Ava, watching as she laughed, a sound full of life and mischief. His lips twitched upward just slightly. "Yeah," he admitted. "Maybe it does." The night carried on, filled with stolen kisses, laughter, and a kind of happiness that none of them had expected to find. And as Isabella and Ethan danced under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms, she finally understood. She hadn't just run away from a wedding. She had run toward the life she was always meant to have. The lesson behind the story: At its core, this story isn't just about a runaway bride or mistaken identities. It's about choice. It's about standing up when the world expects you to sit down, about walking away from a life that doesn't feel like your own, and about embracing the uncertainty of the unknown, because that's where real happiness begins. Isabella's journey reminds us that love shouldn't be a transaction or a duty. It should be a choice, a conscious decision to be with someone because of who they are, not because of what they bring to the table. She had to let go of the life that was planned for her to find the life that was meant for her. And in doing so, she found something even greater: freedom. Ethan's role in this story isn't just that of a savior. He didn't rescue Isabella. He challenged her. He forced her to stop running and start choosing. And in return, she showed him that love wasn't about perfection. It was about acceptance. Liam and Ava's story is another reminder. Sometimes, what we think we want isn't what we actually need. Liam thought he needed Isabella, but fate had other plans. The right person doesn't always come in the package we expect, and true love often finds us when we least expect it. So, what's the lesson? Don't let fear, duty, or expectation trap you in a life that isn't yours. Choose your happiness, even if it means walking away from everything familiar. Because in the end, the greatest love stories aren't the ones written for us. They're the ones we write for ourselves. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one.